Welcome to the Right to Ignite podcast, where we talk to authors who are writing to ignite the next generation with a heart for the Lord. I'm Kyle Morgan.
And I'm Brenda Covert.
Now, Brenda, I have a question for you. Are you braced for a collision?
I hope so. Got my pillows all around.
Our guest today is the founder of The Collision, a multimedia Christian ministry aimed at helping Christians engage with pop culture and the arts. He is the author of multiple books, including The Lost City Chronicles, a young adult fantasy trilogy, and Straight to the Heart, communicating the gospel in an emotionally driven culture. He is also the grandson of Henry Blackaby, the author of Experiencing God. Daniel lives in Georgia with his wife, Sarah, and their twin boys, Emerson and Logan. Daniel, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you guys. So I'm glad to be here.
So I wanted to kind of start with The Collision. What is your hope for The Collision, and kind of why did you start it?
Yeah, well, the collision is always it's been a long journey for me to do. It's always been something that I've been passionate about, just engaging with the arts as a Christian and really fostering conversations, helping, just ignite and initiate other Christians to come on and talk about this stuff in a more just thoughtful way. And so over the years, I've had blogs and different things where I've done that. And I think probably about 5 years ago now, had the opportunity to kind of use that journey and launch the Collision as a full ministry. Looking at movies and looking at just cultural trends and talking to creatives, whether they're Christian or not Christian. And really, kind of the goal has always just been to be a resource for the church, to be a resource for Christians, to help make them aware of what's out there in culture, help them make good decisions as far as entertainment, but at a deeper level, just to engage more thoughtfully with the stories and understanding some of the messages or the significance of that. And so really that's the heart of what we do, is just helping kind of equip, give resources for Christians just to engage culture more thoughtfully.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, well, I want to dive into everything you've written. You've written everything from picture books to middle grade to young adult and nonfiction. What draws you to write for such different audiences, and how do you know which ideas belong where?
Yeah, well, that's a big question. I love stories. I love writing. That's sort of been my journey. I was an English major in college, loved literature. I'm, an avid bookworm. I'm always reading, and really throughout, the rest of my education, I did theology and other things, but always with kind of through the lens of stories. I did some doctoral work and wrote my dissertation on literature, like an apologetic from literature. And so that's sort of always been an undercurrent of just everything I've done is just stories, telling stories, engaging with stories, learning from stories. And kind of along the way, it's one of those things where opportunities come up and you just trust God that, for this is the path to take. This is the opportunity. Okay, like my first book, the fantasy series I wrote, it was actually my final year of college. So I was young, didn't know that sort of was my education in writing, is just that
Wow.
process of figuring it out. Looking back, there's things I would do differently, but that's sort of where I was, the opportunity that God gave me. You mentioned did a picture book, which was actually based on my two twin boys. I was a student when they were first born, so I was doing a lot of watching them throughout the day, and it was just one day watching them play. I decided to write a story that one day I could read to them based on their personalities as twins and, helping them to get along. And so that was just, I just felt that was sort of inspiration came just in the middle of living life. And obviously like the nonfiction books and stuff, been very few that I've actually really pursued. There's been some, but a lot of it is just things that have relationships, contacts, things that have come up, just opportunities that God has opened doors. And then, when he opens those doors, just trying to be faithful and, you know, step through that and be a good steward of those opportunities. But it's been fun to sort of dip my toes in various things. And there's still a lot of stuff that documents and idea folders that I'm hoping to eventually sort of be able to explore as well.
Well, I have to say, I loved The Painter's Portal, and I did not see the ending coming. Totally knocked me out of my chair.
Yeah, well,
And
the
I
funny
didn't think that middle grade reader would affect me that way. but I absolutely loved it and all the creativity and imagination that I'm like, how did you ever even come up with, are you a pantser or a plotter?
Uh, I'm kind of, I don't know. I don't really know what my, it depends on what I'm writing. Sometimes I'll really plot it out. With that one, it's probably my funnest experience as a writer. Because I had just finished, I had some contracts and some stuff for some of the other books, like the fantasy books and then some nonfiction. And I'd really been, my brain was filled with deadlines and expectations. And I think it was the day I turned in the final manuscripts for those like contracted books that I started the Painter's Portal. And it was sort of my release of like, I'm gonna write this. I have no real plan. I don't, I'm not thinking about publishing or even audience. Like I want to write without any of these people, guidelines of how to write. And it's probably the quickest book. Like, I think I wrote that in like a month and a half, 2 months. I sort of had the idea in my head for a while and just
Wow.
hadn't been able to pursue it. But I mean, for me, that was the ultimate of just pure freedom. Tell a story, and obviously editing, you go back and try and point it to audiences and all that kind of stuff. But just the joy of writing for the sake of writing, whether anyone else ever read it or not. And the story itself is deeply personal. Like the characters are based on me and my siblings, and so there's a lot of stuff that I was pulling from my own like life experiences. But just a reminder to me of like at the base of it, like I know as authors and stuff there's a lot of talk about publishing and audiences and all those sort of things. But I mean, if you don't love just doing it, then I think you're sort of missing a lot of just what it means to be a writer. So I love that experience.
That's so good too, because if especially after the first draft, we're thinking about, who is this for, and how do we get the attention of this person and this, this publisher or this agent and stuff. But you're right, there is such a joy of just writing for you. And if you don't like it, then nobody else is going to like it.
Yeah, just
So
remembering what it's all about. But yeah, I
yeah.
love doing that.
So you wrote the fantasy trilogy for the Lost City Chronicles. That was a young adult, right?
Yeah, like a YA fantasy.
And then you wrote some other
Yeah,
nonfiction
and
stuff.
listen, here it is. Look how thick this book is.
Wow.
I was so scared on page 198, I was afraid to read any further. Someday I'll be brave.
So when you're writing for teens, and even some of your nonfiction has kind of been geared toward teens, how do you reach this next generation, and like what is unique about young adults today that you're seeing that like the stories that they need?
Yeah, well, it's interesting too, because like I said, when I wrote the kind of the YA, the fantasies, I mean, I wasn't necessarily, I guess I was young adult, I wasn't teen, but I was, started writing that when I was probably 21. It was published, I think when I was 23 or 24, so still relatively wasn't too far removed. So I was drawing like that character was very much kind of a biographical. The lead character in that was very much based on me and my personality and experiences, and the female character in that is was based on my at the time my girlfriend, now my wife. So like a lot of it is pulling from people I knew and like our experiences. And obviously as time goes on, like that was over 10 years ago. Like I'm further removed from from that age and the experiences, and so there is a sense of, obviously I think there are universal things that speak across time, just identity and, longing and loneliness and, purpose and things that I think that will transcend any generation. And, you can kind of count on that still speaking to that audience. But there is a sense, even with the nonfiction too, of making sure that I'm actually around young adults. And, my wife's a high school teacher, so I sort of have that avenue to pick their brains, some of her students, and learn from them and kind of what are the questions that they're asking, what are their, their issues. And a lot of what I write isn't necessarily always aimed at these specific problem. I do tend to focus more just on the bigger picture stuff and kind of hoping that that will be, for all ages. But there is a sense of, hey, in order to write to the audience, you need to probably the most valuable thing you can do is just like turn off the laptop, stop writing, and like go spend time with young people and just learn from them, so that you're actually understanding who you're writing to, and it's not just sort of in your own head.
And I remember seeing you at the Right to Ignite conference. At lunchtime, you would be surrounded by the teenagers. They just all were attracted to you.
Yeah, and that's my happy place. Christians, I mean, all creative Christians is, I think that's where so much of the benefit comes is not even in the sessions or anything that I was sharing in those conferences, but just chatting with them as people and learning who they are and getting to know them. And I mean, I still have some of those student or some of those attendees on Facebook and stuff that I'll keep up with now and then. And but just trying
That's
to
awesome.
have a posture of listening. I know that's sort of being, I think for all any kind of writing, whether it's young adult or not, because we're the ones writing the words, we can get very focused on speaking and what we have to say and our message. And I think, the first step always just needs to be listening, whether that's observing or like taking the initiative to ask questions and like actually sit down with people. But just start from a posture of openness to receive before we jump to kind of get to our message.
Yeah, and there was, I can't remember, at one of our Right to Ignite classes, there was an editor that was saying that a lot of the books she's receiving are the way written basically from parents' perspective of what they want to tell their kids instead of, learning what the kids are experiencing and learning more, about them. Like there is, you're the parent and you need to, write this story that will kind of, not necessarily scold them, but lecture them. And you have to kind of, you have to kind of avoid that. And
Yeah, well, it's the talking with rather than talking to, I think is the key. Like, I know for our
yeah,
nonfiction stuff that me and my brother have done some books kind of for teenagers and we've always tried to strike that tone of obviously we're not pretending like we're teenagers, we're not gonna, we're not fooling anyone, we're not that young anymore, but to still have that posture of like, hey, we're talking with you. We're on this journey too, and our experiences might be different, but we're both humans and we have a lot of these same issues and struggles. And rather than the posture of sort of, I got I'm on top of the mountain and I'm going to speak, wisdom down to you below, because I think that just people tune that out, especially younger audiences just tune that out.
Your family has such a rich writing legacy. So, how young were you when you decided you wanted to be a writer too?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I don't know if I ever decided I wanted to be a writer. Like I always wrote stories. I still have some of my, I was 10 maybe, and I have, like I didn't have a computer or anything back then, so it's just handwritten stories, and I've always loved telling stories, and a lot of them were based on like Star Wars fanfic before fan fiction was even a thing. That's just, I would base it on that, and then eventually I'd start writing my own kind of stories, and like obviously I was around that world. Like I valued reading, I valued writing. You can trace back, like I'm fourth generation and probably even further, but as far as we know, like my great great grandpa was, he was like a published poet in England and and then my grandfather wrote Bible studies and my father's written dozens of books and um, so it definitely is a part of that. We're in that world. We see the value of the written word and but it was never something that, that was like pushed on us or that I even really thought about like as, writing a book. Like, it kind of like I said earlier, it sort of just emerged as an opportunity and it's like you're so caught up in it that eventually you kind of look back and like, I guess I'm an author now. I wrote a book. I guess I'm continuing the legacy of writing and it's funny because like my grandfather, his Experience in God book is this wildly successful, sold millions of copies, and but he was 50 years old when he published that book. It wasn't. Oh, there we go.
yeah, I don't
Um,
know if you can see it, but
yeah, that was very much like an extension of his minute. He'd been ministering as a pastor for decades, and and he never had any aspiration to write a book. Like that was something that people approached him for, and he was happy just to keep, being a pastor and serving. And then my father has wrote books, and I think he was maybe in his 30s when he wrote his first book with my grandfather, and then I published my first book with my brother in my early 20s. So we do joke, like I have young kids, they're 10, and we're like, if we're gonna keep this, keep the pattern going, like they gotta publish something in the next, 5 or 6 years to, just keep making them younger and younger. And they are. My one son he's working on his first book right now. So
Awesome.
he loves, he's definitely caught that storytelling bug. But yeah, it's an amazing thing to look back and say, that isn't a normal legacy to be a fourth generation author. That's amazing. I actually have an anthology that I ordered from like England of poetry that has some of my great grandfather's poetry in it. And I have
wow.
that kind of on my shelf. This is a reminder of sort of the legacy and where things have come. But but yeah, to be a part of that has just been, I mean, it's something I never really anticipated, but it's been awesome.
That's so cool. And so, as an author and as a father, like, what kind of books are you looking for your children to read? What are the ones that you really want to instill in them, and what are, some modern books and some classics and stuff that you want them to read?
Yeah, yeah, my kids, I have two twin boys and they're 10. So they're right at like sort of they've just crossed the hump of being able to handle like better, more mature stories. And so it's fun to start having those conversations. Like what are the stories that really like formed me and that, they're now old enough that they could appreciate. Like I had them, they did audiobooks of like the Chronicles of Narnia not that long ago. Andrew Peterson's The Wing Feather Saga was some of their favorite books. Obviously, I'm a fantasy nerd, so a lot of the stuff that I am like introducing them to tends to be sort of in the fantastical. They did the audiobooks of Lord of the Rings, although that was a bit challenging for them, just because I'm a big Tolkien nerd. But it does make you think of sort of the types of stories. I mean, as a writer too, of what are the sort of stories? What I want them to read, and whether that's already out there or whether I should write something. Like I did have one of them read my Painter's Portal book and give me his thoughts on. He had a couple critiques of my book, but he more or less he enjoyed it. Um, and there's overlap too with the collision of, say, I want them to have books that are edifying, and especially at that age, that I can trust, and this is going to really instill wholesome virtue in them. But I also want them to grow to be able to engage with things that are more challenging and that aren't necessarily told from a Christian perspective. Not things that are just filled with a bunch of garbage, but things that have different perspectives and different worldviews behind it, and so that I can kind of guide them through, you know, having those conversations and engaging with the story and, saying, good stories aren't just the ones that affirm us, they're the ones that challenge us and make us ask questions. And obviously as a father, I got, and they'll be different for every kid. And you got to be sensitive, even just I have two twins and they're at different stages too. Like, you got to be sensitive to what they can handle and don't throw them into the deep end. But as a father, that has been fun. I mean, like I've had them come to movie reviews, that I've done reviews for, and then had conversations about that, and some books that, reading through, like we're reading through the Hunger Games with them right now and having conversations about that and some of the themes in that book. And so, I mean, for me, I want to find books that they're going to enjoy. I want to instill that in them. But I also want them to just learn how to think critically about books and kind of navigate that kind of beyond just the level of pure like, escapism.
Yeah, I
What
love
are
that.
your thoughts on using a pen name when I mean, clearly you don't, but we've had a master class recently where the discussion went towards using pen names when you're writing in different genres or for different age groups. So, what are your thoughts on authors who use pen names to try to separate their work?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought of that before. I mean, especially because I publish other stuff, it's obviously helpful, I think, to for people to know my name and that I've published things and books. And but there are especially like some fiction stuff, like I've some stuff I've written that not that I would hide behind a pen name, but things that are a bit more out there, I guess, than what might be expected. It's like, well, do I need a pen name? Or and I think it just depends on, I mean, it depends on the person. Like I probably wouldn't, just because I think all stories, I want those conversations. And if, I want people to read this and have those conversations. If they disagree with the direction I took on this story and it's not what they expected from what I've previously written, like I'm fine with having those conversations and, just and engaging in that way. But I don't know. I do think it could be, I think there's a freedom to it as well, where you can kind of not hide behind it, but you can sort of write under a different identity and sort of not feel the pressure of expectation that maybe are coming from other places previously. That there is a sense of that sort of intrigues me of, hey, what if I could just write whatever and no one knows who I am and I don't have to and just sort of go wherever with this story where it leads. But I don't know. I don't know if I will ever do that myself.
Well, I know I intended to. I was going to use my maiden name for children's works and my grown-up name for adult works. I got so excited when I got my contract that I forgot and used my real name. So I'm just going to be Brenda Covert across the board.
So
Too
you've
late now.
So you were accidentally Brenda Covert.
Yeah.
Well, you brought up being such a fantasy nerd, and I wanted to ask you this question because I grew up homeschooled in the early 2000s, so right when Harry Potter came on. And Christians seem to just have such a complicated relationship with the fantasy genre. On one hand, you've got like the Chronicles of Narnia and the Lord of the Rings, and then, I grew up, reading in Focus on the Family's Clubhouse magazine, like, is Harry Potter the Antichrist? Like, what is it about the fantasy genre that attracts so many Christians and frightens so many Christians, and what are the benefits of it?
Yeah, well, it's funny too, because like like the founders of modern fantasy, like obviously Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, but even like George MacDonald and even going further back, like the Wrinkle of Time books, like so much of that was done by Christians, some of the best in the genre. And yet like Christian audiences have always been kind of lukewarm at best towards the genre and like very divisive. And so you sort of have this weird paradox of, it's we're the best at it, but we don't necessarily know if we like it or if we
Yeah.
should even be doing it. And I think it's one of those things like different Christians have different convictions for that. My own convictions are like I love it. We recently read through all the Harry Potter books with my kids and kind of revisiting those stories after I had read them, growing up as well. And I mean, I love writing fantasy. I love, if I either read like old school like Dickens like classics or like modern fantasy are like my two genres. And so for me, like, I read most of the major fantasy stuff that's out there still. And um, I think, at least for me, and especially doing like the collision and hearing from people, when we review things that have magic in them and stuff, like I totally get the concerns and I get the scriptural basis and some of that. To me, it just seems like the dividing line is whether you read that as sort of literal or just sort of like for me, it's sort of like something like Harry Potter is like a magical aesthetic. Like that's the world building. The story's not about magic. It's about, coming of age and it's about imagination and seeing the world as a boy and becoming a man and so many other deeper themes that they just happen to sort of use fictional magical spells and, wear robes and but it's not a story to me about magic. Like I think there are stories that are more about the magic and about the witchcraft and stuff to be concerned about. But for me, I think, if anyone should be open to some of that, it should be Christians that do recognize that there is spiritual reality and I think just the imagination of it, like, we should be the ones, and I think we have historically been the ones like leading the charge of just, dreaming big, having these big worlds and stuff. And so again, I don't judge any Christian for being like, hey, you know what? Like for me and my kids, like it just feels I don't feel comfortable with it. Like there's lots of other stories that don't have it that to read, but I've always been drawn to it because I think so much of the fantasy, the fantastical elements just lend themselves to telling sort of more universal stories of good and evil and imagination and just faith and belief in powers beyond us. And so I think as Christians, whether the storytellers are Christian or not, like there's just so much to latch onto and like, engage with in that I love it. I think Christians should sort of be the ones to continue that legacy because we've sort of paved the way already.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, because it's been an interesting thing to see. And there are books that are written where there is no fantastical elements that worldview wise are completely, unbiblical. And so, it really depends on what the story is, what the themes are, as opposed to, how the story's told and what elements are in the story.
Yeah, it's an easy thing to see, I think, is what makes it so contested is you can, if there's sort of magical spells or that sort of aesthetic, we can sort of see this must be not a Christian worldview. Whereas like tons of other stories that I think Christians maybe aren't as hesitant about, like you said, probably have stuff that's more concerning to me as a parent and as a Christian, that content and worldview stuff that I think we should be critical of. It's just you don't necessarily see that from like the front cover to know, and it takes a bit more work. That I think that's why some of the fantasy stuff gets the blunt of the criticism and the concerns because it's just so visible and like overt.
Yeah.
Well, you have a podcast, and can you tell us about that and what maybe it has taught you in your writing career?
Yeah, so I have the Faith and Pop Culture podcast. We've been doing that for a while now, and really just looking at sort of the extent, just our chance to just chat about a lot of the stuff that we cover at the Collision, like whether it's movies or trends or just what's going on in culture. And we've had the opportunity to to have on some guests, some creatives, and just pick people's brains about you know different just different Christians working within that field, whether they're telling stories or we've had some directors on there or other culture critics, and just sort of learning from them. And I don't know, it's been healthy for me, obviously we hope that it's helpful for other people that that listen to it, but as the guy doing the podcast, it's been helpful for me just to because it forces me to just, to practice what I preach and like think critically about culture and process things and, think through what's happening and how that affects my faith and how that teaches me about the culture that I feel like Christ has called me to step into and reach and just we've tried to sort of model even more so than just like the content because obviously people will listen to a podcast and then they'll listen to other ones and they'll move on and they'll probably forget a lot of like the specifics that you said, but we've tried to just model but having Christians engage in a conversation honestly the method of doing that I think can have like a lasting influence of just that's what it looks like to think critically about culture and to push back on each other and have constructive engage, conversations and speak to people that think differently than you do and in a way that's not, yelling at each other and angry. And, so sort of our hope for that is just being to, yeah, like hopefully we help people, navigate this specific movie or this cultural trend, but kind of beyond that, just encourage Christians to just have conversations and be open-minded and sort of, have that posture of listening and engaging in those conversations.
Yeah, I love that. Not only being able to pick people's brains, which this has been a delightful part of podcasting because we've only been doing this since June, but also, getting our readers, new information, things they didn't think about, hadn't thought about before.
So one question I wanted to ask you was we were talking about, with the collision and everything, getting Christians actually talking about culture and everything. And you basically said that kind of the goal is that Christians need to stop just criticizing the culture and start contributing to it. Is that kind of the idea too?
Yeah, that's been a big part for because there's been, Christians have been engaged in culture since forever, since there's Christians and culture. There's been those conversations, is how that engagement has sort of what the dynamic of that relationship is has changed and morphed over the years. And, initially it was pretty positive and sort of went through a period where sort of like an anti-culture stand posture of culture's bad. We're stuck in it, so we got to learn how to sort of navigate it. But like from the default that it's all bad, and like the goal is to just sort of get through it without as much muck stuck to us as we can, and just not from a place of love of culture, like a love of stories, and I mean there's definitely an aspect of trying to not just get a bunch of muck on you and culture. Not that that's not valid. It's just that that was sort of the only approach was just it's all bad. And so part of what we've again, we're just one small part in that. There's lots of other Christians out there pushing for the same kind of movement, but to just be more positive of well, actually culture's good. Like, our first task as humans was to, cultivate a garden and grow things and, take care of the land and the world. Like there's a big, part of our spiritual legacy that is about being creative and growing things and contributing to a world that's beautiful. And obviously that's not pop culture necessarily, but I think it extends to hey, what are we doing to actually contribute to this? We might see some bad stuff out there, and we can kind of scold people and try to get it out of there and get it out of the theaters and have our kids not read it. But are we actually at the end of the day, you don't influence a culture by subtraction. Like you influence it by addition, by offering something new and something beautiful and an alternative. And so we've tried to just whether that's like actually creating, like encouraging people to tell stories and make movies and engage in that, or just contribute in sort of those conversations with what exists, but in a more positive way. Like we're actually adding to the conversation about this. We're not just sort of yelling at everyone to keep their voices down and not talk about it. Like we're actually hoping that Christians can engage, whether they agree with the movie or not, like still engage and have those conversations in a way that is constructive. But again, the bottom line is that we want more Christians creating stuff, and we do hope by like focusing and spotlighting some of these creatives and stuff that it does spark, more Christians to want to step up and kind of contribute to the culture.
Yeah, I love that because the more I look at it, the more I'm realizing, oh, Phil Vischer of VeggieTales was like, way ahead of his time. Like nobody was like following after him, and like there was like a momentum, and then there was like nobody else, and it was kind of a one person thing, and it's like, oh no, we need to do this as multiple people. We need to kind of build something bigger.
Yeah, well, yeah, because you even see that with like I know like, as someone that was trying to write fa Christian fantasy and like there's sort of this there can be a mindset of like yeah we've done that we got Tolkien we got Lewis and it's like they're awesome no one's ever going to top those guys but like that was a while ago like we don't need to stop just because they wrote the Lord of the Rings back in the 50s or whatever like they're and I think like you said Veggie Tales or some of this like yes they're the people that have done it but I don't think we've always been as good to move beyond just sort of cheering them on and move to like so what does that mean? How do we sort of follow that example and contribute our own thing and have more Christians on board and not just sort of like we check the box. We have every time a Christian songwriter gets famous or has a success or a movie does well at the theaters, it's like yes, we did it. We influenced the culture and it's like no, like that should motivate us to like yes, there's a hunger for it. So we need more Christians that are stepping in to sort of fill that need.
Yeah, build on that momentum, and yeah.
So have you ever been or are you in a writing group or a critique group or anything like that in your years as a writer?
The nonfiction work, which has sort of dominated my writing for the last couple of years, just because that's the opportunities that have come up in the contract. So I've been focused on that. And those have been like co-writing things. Like I've written several books with my brother. I'm currently writing a book with my brother and my father, like a sequel to my grandfather's book, Experiencing God, which will come out in June. I think June 1st it comes out. So in some ways, there sort of is like a built-in critique group of we're writing in Google Docs and we can leave notes and you're pushing back and so there is some degree of that. But I've always found it helpful to I mean to have other people read my work and I know some Christians are can get or just some creatives can are sort of timid about that and it's like there is sort of that fear of opening up
Mhm.
and letting others and I guess for me it's always been like if I'm going to write sort of publicly then I got to be fine to let people critique it. Like I gotta learn how to deal with this. Better to do it with people I trust before I go in front of the rest of the public that can share their comments and opinions and I think even just I mean I've had people read my books. I've kind of handpicked different. I try and pick people that are different like genders and ages and this person loves fantasy. This person's never read a fantasy. And just sort of get different perspectives. But I think some of it too is just talking, just, even if I'm not talking about my specific writing, just meeting with other creatives regularly, like going for coffee with a screenwriter or someone, and maybe we're not critiquing my actual book, but we're just talking about stories and we're talking about approaches to storytelling. And for me, that's almost as helpful as them critiquing the story of just that usually sparks stuff and sort of helps me, kind of like iron against iron. Like it helps sharpen me that, I mean, I would say it's essential for Christians to have some sort of community, whether that's digital or in person or big or just one or two people, because writing can be so like isolating in some ways. Like it's just you and your computer at night with coffee or something. Like just to have some sort of built-in community, I think will just bring out the best in your own writing.
Well, yeah, and I'm pretty sure if you look at any of the classical authors, they were part of some writing community, I mean, even Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, she was on vacation with her writer friends, I mean, it was so it was definitely there's always been kind of that community. But I was going to ask you a question about one of your contributors to the collision, Joseph Holmes. He wrote about that the future of the family is going to be more religious because the only people who are having children are religious families or are religious people. And so, as children's authors, should we try to write more explicitly Christian material, knowing that that demographic is going to expand, or should we continue to write something that will impact the general market and beyond?
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, probably the least helpful answer either is like probably both and of I think it
Yeah.
depends. Like, I think there's a need for both, and like I know for me, I've never thought of sort of audiences and writing necessarily in that way of like that they're like when I was writing my fantasy book or my Painter's Portal, like some of the fiction stuff, like I never really thought of it as I'm writing this for this audience or this is my Christian book and this is my my more public market. Like, for me, I don't know. I don't really think of culture in that sense. I know for how it's marketed and some of that sort of stuff, like those are important conversations to still have. But for me, it's just trying to be faithful to the story that I feel God has given me to tell, or the idea, and to sort, tell the best version of that story. And if that story happens to, appeal more to wider audiences, or if it's more like this is sort of exploring stuff that I think the church would engage with most, or religious people, and it's not as wide appeal, like then that's what I'm going to do. And I think even if like my fantasy trilogy, like the first fiction books I ever wrote, you can almost see me wrestle with that in like real time of sort of like I feel like the first book was very subtle and stuff, and then it got more, and I guess sort of the way you can sort of see me throughout that process of like, what does it mean to be a Christian writer? Like, how much allegory or metaphor, how much message do I need? Do I need any message? Do I need to be? And you kind of see, I think by the end of that book, I sort of landed where I think I still stand of just tell good stories. I think faith and stuff is going to come out because that's a big part of our humanity and our, and I think as Christians, a big part of who we are and our worldview. And sometimes I think stories can be more overtly Christian as far as like, or at least religious. And but I never see that as like an expectation of just, I need to write for this kind of audience to meet this need. And for me, it's just what's going to make the most sense for this story and focus on that. And then just sort of trust God that the people that need that story are gonna be impacted by it one way or another.
Oh, sorry.
Inquiring minds want to know, how do you balance all these creative pursuits? Your writing, your podcasting, your speaking in everyday life with your family.
Yeah, well, not always well, to be honest. I mean, that's been a struggle for, I mean, the whole journey is, just how do you balance some of these things. And I mean, some like the collision, like that's my job. So, you know, I, I, I can do that for my work. But I mean, that bleeds into my family life and then, writing, it's sort of one of those things that I've heard people, I'm sure you guys have both heard people say, as soon as I have some time, I'm going to write a book or I'm going to start writing this. And it's like the reality is like you never have time. Like there's never just open slots of time. I mean, I've never had that experience of just, hey, now I have time. Everything, and I have two young kids and they got football and soccer practice and school performances and it's just sort of chaos that for me it's I mean, writing is finding time. It's getting up an hour earlier and working in the morning. It's, not watching TV at night and sitting at your desk, even if you don't feel like it, and trying to pluck out another chapter or page but I mean, it's just about, I mean, it's about priorities for me of just what can I do to carve out time? What needs to be cut away? What do I need to like not do or back off of doing so that I have time to fit into this? But I mean, that changes too. Like that, like the season of life, the season of the age of my kids, whether it's soccer season or not soccer season, like some of that changes, and you sort of have to just adapt with it and find that time. But the sort of the through line through all of that is just there's never the ideal time to make it fit. You have to make those hard decisions of I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to spend my time doing this, or even if I want to, or if that's a good thing or a good opportunity, like I backed off doing some volunteer work from other places so I could focus on this. And, I wish I could do it all, but you can't. And if you're sort of waiting for that time to come, then the book's just never going to get written.
Yeah, and I think if you're waiting for your children to grow up and you're going to have all this free time, well, guess what? You're going to have grandkids and they're going to be at your house every weekend. You will never have a moment to write. So, yeah, you just got to buckle down, make choices, and find some time because it's not going to be just sitting there waiting for you.
So, who's an author today that you really love what they're doing? It could be in the fantasy world, it could be, nonfiction or anything, but just somebody that whenever their book comes out, you're like, I'm getting that, I'm pre-ordering that, you just love what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's several. I mean, I have some fictional authors that I'll, if they have a new book that comes out, then I'll follow that. I know there's, a lot of like the nonfiction. Like there's an author, Makoto Fujimari. I don't know if he wrote Faith and Art and Faith and Culture Care. I just like his perspective. He's an artist, but he's writing about engaging culture from the perspective of like a very talented visual artist. And so he just has a different take. that's a little different than my own, but also overlaps. And I'm trying to think. There's other that is you just sort of know it will be good, or at least it'll be thought provoking. Like Karen Faith or Karen Swallow Prior has some of her stuff about reading and stuff was impactful for me. And so if she has a new book, then I usually pick that up and at least dialogue with it, whether I agree with all of it or not. And um, but yeah, I tried too to sort of stretch myself of because that's the problem is as you sort of collect those like go-tos, then you just have a lot of books that are coming out all the time from people that from books or fictional series that you just keep going back to because there's a new one, and that I try and be intentional to also find books and stuff that like I wouldn't normally gravitate towards, or an author that's like a non-Christian author that's talking about some of these issues, and it's like how do I just sort of see their perspective on this and get out of that comfort, or like a fictional series. I do a lot of audiobooks too, just so I can do more stories, and that's where I'll do a lot of those books of just I can sort of listen to it on the go and kind of hear, explore sort of other stories. But I try and just sort of keep, like I have my go-to, I have my favorites, and I mean, I some of them I go back to over and over. Like I read The Lord of the Rings every year, like January 1st every year for the last like 10 years at least. I start the series, I read it over Christmas break, and I've just that's how I've started every year because I get kind of enriched by that. So, I'm all about rereading books too, but yeah, just trying to just see what's all out there and never get too comfortable with just sort of my go-tos, but just sort of seeing different types of stories and genres and stuff that, and trying to sort of learn what I can from just the vast, array of different authors and storytellers that are out there.
What advice would you give to writers who want to explore writing in multiple genres like you have? Any advice?
Um, I mean, read lots, obviously, like if, just be familiar with other genres and sort of because I think every genre does, obviously you don't want to get like too stuck, like too rigid with it, but I think every genre has sort of its own language and its own expectation. Like there's this stuff to it that I think is, at least for me, is helpful to sort of know whether you follow it or not, at least sort of know the world you're stepping into. Um,
Definitely.
but I mean, for me, I think it's just realizing that all these genres are about humanity. Like even the ones that aren't about humans, that are about fantastical creatures or whatever. Like at the end of the day, it's about people, and human desires and needs and journeys, and that I've sort of tried to just focus on that of like, explore different genres and stuff, but at the end of the day, the core of these stories is the same, and you should be able to translate that to different genres because they're just exploring, like horror is exploring fear and human stuff just from a different perspective as fantasy or romance, maybe it's more uplifting, but it's still exploring a lot of those kind of base level human emotions and desires. And so I guess for me, yes, like no, do your research, read in the genre, see what's out there, but maybe don't get too caught up in like in just I'm writing a sci-fi story or I'm writing a fantasy story. And I think for me at least it's helpful to like I'm writing a human story that's also sci-fi or fantasy or horror or romance or whatever it is. And I think at least as a starting point, that should point you in like at least a fruitful direction.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing this. This has been fun.
Yeah, thank you guys. It's fun I don't always get to just chat about writing this all that often but I mean, I love it. This is writers are my people. So it's fun just to chat about this stuff.
Brenda, did you have any more questions?
Um, one more.
Okay.
What's
Go for
one
it.
thing readers would be surprised to know about you besides reading Lord of the Rings every new year?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. It would be surprised. I mean, I'm a super diehard European heavy metal guy. Like, so a lot of my, I know a lot of authors like to listen to quiet music or no, they need silence. But for me, the soundtrack to all my books, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, is just being European heavy metal. So that gets me
Wow.
in the mood for for that. But I think whatever works.
Would never have guessed.
Uh,
Yeah, I've been
Well, I would never, I didn't expect that answer.
I've been listening to almost nothing but sea shanties lately. That's been the an old German sailor songs, but I'm writing somewhat of a pirate book, so that it's very
It gets
specific
you in
to
the
this
right.
project.
And I write for children, so I have Scooby-Doo going in the background.
uh, well, if you want to check out Daniel's writing, you can head on over to thecollision.org, or you can check out some of his books. His newest title, Experiencing God in Everyday Life, A Journey Towards Spiritual Maturity, comes out June 2026. So be sure to keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you will tune in the next episode. In the meantime, keep writing and igniting those hearts for the Lord.